What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy, and today we're going to have a full length interview. But before we get into that, feel free to go back to listen to previous episodes of rants for hot topics and mental minutes or quick mental game hacks to help elevate your performance, and then deep dive educational explorations to go into little intricacies of the game, skill acquisition, and being in the zone. Right. So if you have any future questions, topics, or guests, feel free to send that in to inthezonepodcast123@gmail.com or reach out to any platform that you see this on. But yeah, without further ado, we have Matt Passauer, or Coach Pass, with Kennesaw State. What's going on?
How you doing?
Hey, it's awesome to have you on here. I know we connected recently whenever we were at the Wake Forest Bridge seminar. Connected really well there and had a lot of interesting topics that we went over. So I'm sure we'll touch on a few of those today, but appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Yeah, looking forward to it. December is definitely a good month for college guys to have some free time and do stuff like this.
No doubt, no doubt. Well, I guess that's a good segue too, just for some questions that I have for you, because everybody, and me being in the private sector, you being in the college side, this is when a lot of guys come to see me, and then obviously less guys are seeing you during that portion of time. So I really like to have communication with the coaches and being like, hey, what's your plan? Or at least, the players send me what their first live AB day is, right? And then I just kind of work backwards from there. But from what you guys do over at Kennesaw State, what do you, I guess, consider to have as ramping up throughout this time period to make sure guys are primed and ready for the spring season?
Sure. So we end up doing our rest and recovery right after our fall season. So we played the University of Georgia on November 5th. That was the last day of our team practice fall. And whether it was a deload shutdown or just kind of a time to take a mental break from the stresses of the fall, that happens. And then the on-ramping is going on right now, right? It's dependent on what that guy did after the fall and what that on-ramp needs to look like. We try to put guys in a place to be at about 65 to 75 pitches opening weekend. So similar to what you're saying, we work back from opening day to try to figure out what that exact on-ramp needs to look like from a workload over the course of the spring and those preseason outings to make sure that they're ready to roll for that. Um, for us, I think the fun part is guys going away. I certainly try to manage a lot of areas of our players' development, and it's to the point where it's really good for guys to play summer ball and go to trainers so that they can hear other perspectives, find other avenues. Because, right, I think in terms of a player's true advancement of their career, if they want to play minor league baseball, they're going to have a bunch of different coaches, and they need to learn from more than just one Matt Passauer. They need to hear some other ideas and be able to grow that filter of information. Okay, what has helped me in the past? What hasn't? When it becomes professional baseball, how can I be a better filter to know what I do need to try and advance at versus, hey, I've done that in the past and that didn't work for me. Maybe get a little bit better understanding of why that person wants to change something inside of your mechanics arsenal, thought process, pregame routine, whatever. Start feeling that out by training with more than just your college coach.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to get different perspectives, but then also I love how you said it. You're kind of creating your own BS meter in a way where you're like,
Yeah.
hey, I like this, I don't like this, or I don't like any of this at all. You know, they could have kind of finding out also what works for them. And I like what you mentioned too for the deload period. A lot of programs are just like, hey, everybody's no throw. But you mentioned like, hey, some guys are deloading, some guys are, taking more of a mental break, which I think it's very individually specific on what those guys need. Because maybe, you can't have everyone not throw, because maybe one guy's returning back from an injury or something. So he's going to be still kind of on ramping, or, to a guy who's been pitching all spring through all the summer. And then he just kind of was holding on for dear life for the rest of the fall. And he's like, hey, I need to kind of shut it down a little bit, right? Like every guy's situation's a little bit different.
Yeah. And for us, it probably ends up determining a little bit more based on what year you're in, right? We try to get as many of those sophomores up to the Cape as possible with regards to advancement of their career. And those guys are going to probably, if you're going to the Cape, you're going to throw a ton of innings for the Owls too, both the year prior and the year after.
Mhm.
So those guys might need a little bit more of a rest as opposed to freshmen. We try to be a little bit more delicate after that freshman season, right? Longest continuous season of their career. Let's make sure that they are healthy after that season and then go from there. So they might not need quite as much at the end of the fall, whereas the guys who pitch in summer ball, pitch in the fall, and then had pitched previously for us in the spring are just in a different place.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And that's also a good point too. I mean, whenever I was an incoming freshman, I didn't realize, the workload ramp up of like how much everything was going to be just from being at practice every day, throwing every single day. In high school, you get some of it, but you also have weekends off a little bit too. So, going from maybe 4 or 5 days of throwing to then 6, sometimes 7 days, obviously we have, uh, days off with NCAA. I think it's one per week, but even then you're in season. Sometimes you're just like, hey, I got to get a little bullpen in on my own or something, and you're constantly going, constantly. You know, it's definitely an adjustment for some guys. I think that freshman year does kind of weed out a lot of guys to know of like, hey, are you actually doing this because you love it, or are you just doing it because it's something that you were doing with your buddies through high school?
For sure. And hopefully on our side, right, we get to recruit our athletes. Hopefully you can weed out some of those guys before they ever show up too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, your guys' caliber, and you hear it all the time. Like, hey, Kennesaw State's like the hidden gem of college baseball. Like everybody knows that they're getting guys developed and basically ready for whatever that next level is for their careers, whether it's actually getting on the field and playing for you guys, or even going to, out to the Cape and then eventually professional baseball. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, we work hard for that. I know we have 26 years of scouting experience on staff, which is always easy to say when I provide zero of that. But the avenue towards professional baseball, especially with two scouts on staff, you just try to find those guys who are really honing in on not only a college career but life after college as well, and it creates a little bit more diligence to the work ethic, a little bit more big picture planning and big picture development, because it's not just, how do I get out to Kennesaw State? It's, hey,
Mm-hmm.
this pitch might take a little bit longer to develop, but long term, it's really important for your career to keep going with this. We can't just give up on it because the spring has started and it's going to be a low pitch usage percent this year. We need to keep rolling with it. And those guys with long term plans can handle the long term development a little bit better.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and a great coach is going to have that long-term development in mind too, versus like, hey, obviously you need to win games in the season, but you're also, like you said, kind of zooming out, thinking of the big picture for maybe years down the road, or even, couple seasons down the road, for not only for you guys to how they develop within your program, but beyond is awesome. I think, like, you know, I won't name any names or any coaches, but a lot of them try to max out guys within that freshman, sophomore year. And then like you don't see any of the guys still hanging around junior, senior year. So, but I think that's just a testament of a culture that you guys created there, and helps keep guys around and want to be a part of the program.
Yeah, right. We're in a time where the transfer portal is real, and I think it puts a lot of onus and accountability on coaches to do right by the players, which
Mhm.
I hope is a coach's perspective on that, right? Do right by your guys, and they stick around. You keep getting them better. They're going to keep showing up to practice. They feel like you aren't doing much for them or their careers, and all of a sudden they leave. And, you know, at the end of the day, how much accountability can you take for helping those guys do what you said you were going to help them do?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's part of it too. Like recruiting, you can say all the right things, but then once you're actually there, rubber meets the road. Like, hey, are you actually providing what you promised? And, I have no doubt you guys do that. And being in around college baseball, also coaching for a short period of time, it's one of those things where if you don't have everyone in mind and you don't sit down with them individually and be like, hey, like, what are your goals? What are you trying to do? this is what role that we have for you this year coming up. It can kind of get into a little bit of a almost like an identity crisis within the game, if that makes sense. Like some guys are just kind of like, all right, well, I'm showing up, going with the flow, don't really know what my role is. That was also really hard for me as a player if I didn't know what that was. I just was like, all right, I got to be ready at any point.
Yeah, it's something that our team will have to be good at this year, right? The more disparity there is in the talent cap, the less you have to talk about roles because the guy is clearly the guy and the not guy is clearly the not guy. And when you have a better staff with more good arms, all of a sudden, two people are fighting for a certain starter spot. And when they don't win that spot, how productive can you be inside of a role? And that's where, the character side of recruiting comes in, but also just the competitive nature of a human being. Can they still come into a different role and be successful and take ownership of that? And, especially with college and the inconsistencies of 18 to 22-year-olds, right? You might not be a starter opening weekend, and all of a sudden the next weekend you're out there. And if some pride and ego get in the way of work ethic, now you fail in that role too because you were, butthurt that you didn't start opening weekend. How guys handle those things is important. And hopefully we provide enough clarity as coaches, like, hey, here's why you're at where you're at. This is what we see. This is what you need to develop to take that next step. But inside of this role, here's why I expect you to be successful. I would like to believe, other than the male pride of it, if you sit there and listen to a bunch of reasons that are like, okay, yeah, that stat shows that I am good or bad at this, it can help get them inside of that role a little bit easier when you have a clear why instead of, hey man, you're up 10, down 10, see you tomorrow. That would be a tougher conversation.
Yeah, that would be, and especially whenever guys they have something to look at. You're like, oh, hey, I don't have a secondary pitch, or I walk too many guys. Those are like easy measurables. You're like, okay, hey, this is what I need to get better at. Awesome. I know what I need to work on. Maybe throw in a stand-in hitter if you're struggling with lefties, in the box, or, something that they can at least like have some actionable plan towards versus just being like, hey, at some point you may or may not get in. I don't know.
That's right.
So, but yeah, no, I think that's really good to know too. And for guys to not only know that identity of who they are as a player, but how that's going to affect them outside of baseball too. Right. And we, being baseball coaches, we wear many hats, and I'm sure, where you're at, you're, the data guy, the TrackMan guy, the biomechanist, and then also a sports psychologist in some of those aspects too. So
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the fun part too, is you better know your guys really well because you're diving in. And I think that's where December ends up being a fun month, is you see some of your strengths and weaknesses as coaches, and you go to events like that bridge seminar and you start trying to fine tune some areas that you can provide better for your guys. It's always fun to, whether it's, go watch a training program where guys go specifically to train and watch what a day in the life looks like for your guys somewhere else. And all of a sudden it's like, man, I bet we could allocate time a little bit differently. At some point this fall, I went to a one-on-one training breakdown, and it was awesome. It was really cool to be a part of. A Kennesaw State alumni was the one putting it on and breaking the player down. And we're going to do our entry spring bullpens very differently because I saw a different structure and different plan. And I do think it can be a little bit more personal, even in a 10 bullpen day inside of a time frame. How you break up that timing and manage it can allow for a little bit, you're not just pumping out pens one after the other with two guys rolling double barrel the whole day, right?
right.
You just see different processes and plans, and maybe put a little bit better output for your guy, because we should be learning too, right? Not just them.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that too, it's like, how do I say this? When guys are just going through in the double barrel and bullpens, it's easy to go through the motions versus kind of challenging them and whatever their weakness or strong suit might be. So kind of like I alluded to this a minute ago, but like, hey, if you need a stand-in hitter for every bullpen to get used to someone being in there, because we also know some of those guys that are like picture perfect, all their stuff works when they're in the pen, but it's just him and the catcher. Once
Mhm.
you throw in that, or maybe you even, I had to do this at one point where when guys were getting signs, they would freak out. They were just like, they'd just get rattled. And I'm like, hey, all right, well, we're going to have to give you signs to kind of go through in the bullpen just for you to get used to that and kind of get in that rhythm. So you're not going one pitch. Okay, another pitch, right? Like it's in, we've all done it, even as players, right? Like we've all kind of gone through that just routine. And some days you need days like that. But if you're doing that every single bullpen, I can't ever really say if that's getting the guys 100% better every time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think those are the ones I am a big believer in, like coaching inside of your personality.
Mm,
And
cool.
I am a boring human being and I like to type up notes and have a plan and write like I will print out just a simple Excel spreadsheet of what each guy's plan is for that day and how to break it down. And like that helps me go into the bullpen and be more engaged because I know exactly what that plan is and should look like. Whatever input from the player comes into play. And now we don't do the double barrel pens. We basically do one warm up mound and then you transition onto the like, hey, me and you pen mound. And that helps a little bit. Maybe not always great for the workload management when they rip off 20 sliders because it's not in a good place in the warm up mound. And then we go work on it in the bullpen mound. But I think I have a fairly good understanding of setting myself up for success in those bullpens as well, making sure that I can be coaching the player who is working at the time being instead of, two at a time.
Mhm.
I just can't do that. I'm not good at it. Players wouldn't get better. I wouldn't help them very much. So I try to avoid
A lot of
that.
multitasking for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to focus on my one guy.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I think that actually does simulate more of a game like environment too, anyways, right? Like they're going to have warm ups, and let's do a starter. Like they're the only one that's in control of how many warm ups they do before they get out there. But, you got a bullpen guy. He's in there. He's cold. He's hot for a little bit. Maybe you're taking a little bit longer time coaching up a guy on, a specific pitch or something. He also has to kind of feel that out, just
Yep.
like he would feel out a game. He's like, okay, hey, there's one out. I don't need to continue to keep pumping fastballs if I'm already loose. You know,
Yeah.
one pitch for every other pitch, or just kind of feel it out, see how he's doing, or if he's rolling through the pin. You're like, okay, hey, I got to get this going a little bit more, a little bit quicker. So, what just from my perspective, I think that's a cool a cool way to also kind of simulate that too.
Well, and then right, we all do whatever stats everybody keeps in the fall. One of the things we were just okay at was coming in out of the pen and getting that first batter out. So now it
Hmm.
also enables you to, hey man, once you transition to this mound, no matter what the plan for the day is, even if it's, hey, we need to fine tune the slider, we need to make sure fastball spin metrics are where they should be, whatever. We can also do, hey, you get 8 warmups, then we're going to face a batter, and then we're going to go into the plan for the day. Like, hey, as soon as you get here, we're going to accomplish a task and then get into the plan portion of that bullpen. And right, everything sounds good in December because the theory is going to work in your mind. We'll see how it plays for the Owls in the spring, but that's something that hopefully can create as game like of a thought process and challenge, but still get your development portion of that bullpen in.
100%. Well, I think a lot of that too has to do with the mental side as well, right? Like, does it take you a full batter to actually get locked in and be like, hey, like this is where we're at. We're ready to rock and roll. Or do you need something to kind of anchor you in before you walk the first guy and now you're going from the stretch and you're like, okay, now we're like fully focused in. I've seen not only myself, but other guys kind of fall into that trap where they're like, you know, they think they're locked in, but they're really not locked in until things hit the fan. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of those relievers, right? You talk about the guy who is your closer, your high leverage guy, and it's Sunday and he hasn't pitched all week because that situation hasn't come up. So you put him in and you're up 7, and all of a sudden it's not very clean and sharp,
Mm-hmm.
right? talk about that. We basically refer to it as peak intensity, peak adrenaline level. Like, where do you pitch at your best? And we do it, I mean, pretty like guerrilla math, nothing crazy. Like, hey, scale of 1 to 10, what do you think you pitch at for your best adrenaline? And if you're the, Mariano Rivera, pitch at a 2, how do we hone that mental game plan around you being a 2 when you come in to pitch at a game? And we have a lot of 18-year-olds who come in and say, oh, I'm a 10, I need to be at a 10 all the time. It's like, okay, well, we can't do velo slaps between pitches, right? So we got to figure out how to get you there. Also, usually they come into a 10 situation and they learn, okay, maybe I'm a little bit more of a 7. Maybe some breathing matters a little bit on the mound instead of
For
just
sure.
get amped up and screw everybody, throw as hard as I can.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point too, because a lot of guys, you think of some of them, especially like some of the early closers, like for me, whenever I was watching the game a lot, or like your Papelbons, right? Like they just
Yep.
grew angry. You're just like, okay, like, or Brian Wilson, he was another one that always kind of like came to mind, just absolute animal, but that was his personality and that's how he got things done. Versus someone who's very calm, cool, and collected. Those are two two totally different approaches. And if you can go from that to that, of a switch from a starter to a reliever, then the hitters are also kind of off their timing and rhythm a little bit too, because now the intensity of how the pitch is being thrown is different. Also, just different angles and slots. If you got all of those as a different variety, that's a really electric staff.
Yeah. And that's, again, it's where it's so fun to be a college guy and you get to recruit, right? You get to really build your staff. And it's not necessarily, hey, we want 15 3/4 righties with clean arm action who are fastball, slider, changeup guys and 5 lefties, and let's roll it out there, right? You can look for variants. You can look for different pitches. You can look for those things so that you don't take out your Friday guy and just bring in the B version of that Friday guy as soon as
Mhm.
you take out the A version. And now it's just like, oh, we have the exact same plan. This guy's just easier to hit off of. Right. So that's, again, I think some of the fun in the recruiting side, some of the fun in college that, we get to manage.
Oh, absolutely. And each guy needs to have like its own authenticity of their not only throwing mechanics, but their throwing, ball flight. Like I think the biomechanics actually put out what's going to be happening to the ball, right?
Mhm.
Like a lot of people try to go ball flight and then work backwards. But sometimes it starts with the mechanics and then goes out that way to affect that. Like for a guy who throws cutters, like, hey, maybe if you don't strut across your body too much, maybe you don't throw cutters,
Yeah.
unintentional cutters, I should say. Like if you're a cutter guy, stick with it, right? Be that Mo Rivera, but it's something that I think a lot of guys who get too caught up in the data, too much into the TrackMan stuff, they just isolate that and they don't zoom out and look at the bigger picture of that aspect. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's a tough one in college too, right? You can go beat TrackMan all you want, but at the end of the day, the hitter probably tells you a clearer picture about your stuff than
Mhm.
TrackMan. TrackMan can help. And also, we just have such few data points over the course of the fall. You might be working on a pitch. You might think it's a great pitch. It might check the TrackMan boxes and you had a successful fall with it, but it doesn't play in the spring. And the other piece of that, specifically in college, is like, what if you just, like, your girlfriend broke up with you yesterday, so you're trying that pitch out, you get murdered, and you only pitched 12 innings this fall. So that had a huge leverage on your stats for the fall. And in reality, it's probably more because you had a tough day than the
Yeah.
pitch stinks.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and then there's also other aspects where guys sell out for movement or, IBB or even like sliders, sweepers. They try to just get as nasty of a pitch as possible. But sometimes the pitches that don't have the most movement also get guys out, you know?
Yeah.
It's one
Going
of
to
those
see.
things. Yeah, I think it was Walker Bueller who I was talking to about this. He was like, I asked him, I was like, why do you throw a cutter? It's not that good. Like the movement's not that great. And he was like, I just give him a different look. I was like, okay, that works. You're playing professional baseball, not me. So,
Yeah.
but I guess my point being is like, you don't have to have elite level movement profile pitches all the time to be a good pitcher.
Yeah. I have definitely seen in college 2,100 very mediocre trackman pitches get a ton of swing and miss, and 3,000 sweepers get hit 400 feet. And, developing an arsenal around some of the hard hits can help you too, instead of just some of the trackman data, because the trackman would view those two pitches as one as an elite pitch and one as horrible. But
Right. Yeah. Totally different points of view there too. It's like, hey, did the ball go out? Well, it probably wasn't a good pitch then. Even if
yeah,
it was a perfect pitch, you hit your location, you're like wrong or maybe right pitch, just maybe wrong location or totally the wrong pitch to throw in that entire situation too.
yeah, I think that's another area of college baseball that gets to be slightly unique, but we get to train so many starters, and a true arsenal development can happen because if you're scrimmaging 4 days a week, in theory, 8 guys are starting in that scenario, and you have to get multiple swing paths out. You have to get multiple different types of hitters out. And as much as a reliever can come in, and if it's just a bunch of hitters who kind of drop the barrel and swing like this, and you just go IVB, like you can get that guy out, and that's great. But can you get the next team out too? And I thought
Mhm.
that was a good part of the bridge seminar, was not only the Oakland Athletics pitching coach who spoke about developing starters, but also the fact that they brought a hitting guy in and talked about how to get outs based on swing path. And, when you're developing an arsenal for a starter in college, right? If you are 98, 99 and throw a bunch of strikes and have a good off speed, you're going to get everybody out. But then most of the guys in that next tier with good stuff, can you get a guy out twice or a third time? Can you pitch on Sunday when maybe you've pitched to the scouting report the first 2 days and that guy made an adjustment too, right? Can you get multiple different guys out in a couple different ways? And I think that's where the fall goes a long way for college, because you can do whatever you want, right? There are days where you just make a plan at 9 a.m. Hey, we're going first pitch breakers to everybody, and we're just going to see if this dude can do it, right? He doesn't need to throw a shutout that day, and it's
Yeah.
better if he gets results, but you can test those guys and challenge those guys and see if they can get guys out in a way other than just their A stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and not every day is going to be an A day. You got to turn that B day to an A day, or more like an A day, I should say, or a C day into a B day. And just figure out ways to compete for that, for whatever you got to work with that day.
Yeah,
So,
the John Lester quote of,
hmm.
if you get 30 starts in a season, 5 of them are going to be your A stuff, 5 of them are going to be your C stuff where you just get your brains beat in, and then 20 of them where you make your money. What does your B day look like, and how much success can you have inside of the 20 that are wavering?
Yeah, no, that was actually the exact quote I was thinking about. I just couldn't remember the exact build out. That makes total
Well, we
sense.
use it 8 times a year. I talk about that one all the time. So it's an easy one for us.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's something to just kind of put in perspective too. Like even in life, like, hey, you're not gonna have the best day. Not everything's gonna go according to plan. You got to be able to know how to be adaptable and adjust to whatever comes your way.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially those relievers.
Yeah, no, for sure. And to your point a minute ago, I think a lot of the coaches maybe just kind of intuitively knew this, for or at least for me, just being around the game for so long when you're calling pitches and stuff, you do kind of read swings, but then seeing that presentation and then I was like talking to some other coaches, they're like, yeah, I never really thought about that. I was like, maybe the players don't think about that either. They don't really, or maybe you think about it and you're like, oh hey, yeah, they just naturally see that swing and they know what to throw, but why? You don't really explain why. You're just like, hey, this is the pitch to throw to this guy. But
Mhm.
you never really kind of took it a step back and was like, okay, hey, this is why we're doing this, or why we want to only throw these amount of pitches to this guy. Like when you have heat maps and stuff, it's pretty easy. When you're at a lower tier like a JUCO or a D2, you gotta kind of work with what you're seeing in the on deck circle and then during BP. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a piece that I think comes with a lot of the art of coaching that a lot of people kind of miss.
Well, I think the art and the fun part and the TrackMan part and all of that can reside in, you get to the end of the fall, right? This dude batting average against on righties was 120, batting average against on lefties was 300, right? Okay, how do we bridge the gap of getting lefties out better? Is there a quadrant of the zone he can pitch better to? Is there a pitch that we can create, right? You know what that guy's best stuff looks like. Is there a simple ball maneuver to, oh man, well, he's a, you know, seam shifted sinker guy. Maybe we get that four seam and it has a little cut ride to it. And now he can go in on lefties, right? It's not just, and that's where I think the fun of coaching is now is you can target TrackMan as much as you want, but the more guided you are in targeting that TrackMan, the more it hopefully helps the player instead of just saying like, well, you spin the ball good, so let's shoot for a sweeper because that, should work. Well, that's great, but
Can't be a one trick pony because then guys will figure that out and they'll sit back and wait on that thing.
yeah. And it was a podcast or something, but the comment was if it's uncomfortable to do once, it's not going to be expected to be repeatable. Whereas if you can find something that's comfortable for the player to do, they'll be able to repeat it more often. And luckily, we do have, Edutronic and TrackMan and the biomechanics app. Like if you can find their best movements, their best whatever wrist position, what they are on time for at their best, and just shift the ball a little bit and create a new pitch, like man, now we're really honing in on something that's comfortable for the player, something that's different in terms of the stuff output. And it's probably, whether it checks the TrackMan box or not, like the Walker Buehler cutter, I bet it's really different than his other stuff. And that's why you're creating the pitch.
Sure. No, yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of guys kind of, they're trying to make themselves something they're not. Like maybe a sinker guy's like trying to chase IVB, and I think a lot of guys fell into that trap when Rapsodo first started coming into the picture. Was they were trying to completely change who they were, and you can't really chase that a lot. I know there's a theory that Brian Bannister has. I'm sure you may have heard of this at all, but guys who are more like bicep dominant, quote unquote. I don't even really know if that's the right term for it, to be honest, but that's what he says is like bicep dominant guys who like to cut things, or, the big, really sweepers, the good supinators, right? So when you turn your hand and your thumbs pointed to the sky, for those of you listening, that is kind of like more bicep dominant versus a tricep dominant guy. Best one that comes to my mind is probably like a Devin Williams, right? Like someone who's just going to be out here. They're having really good change ups, or, really good pronation, the opposite side where your thumb's facing towards home plate. I think that is something to kind of come in mind, and how they identify that, I don't really know. That'd be something I'd have to have a discussion with Brian Bannister about. But, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, hey, like if he's super heavy in supination, I'm not going to try to teach him a changeup. It's probably going to be maybe a splitter or another, breaking pitch, cutter or something like that, because that's where he's strongest at. The only thing I've come close to kind of realizing or helping with that would be just like a simple assessment of checking out what guys' range of motion is in the wrist. So they'll be here, kind of put a pin here and see like, hey, if they stuck, can they not get to that full pronation? Then that's where I'm like, okay, we don't want to waste our time trying to throw a traditional changeup, because you physically can't even turn over and get there, so kind of piecing together the physiology side to what they can actually do in performance, I think is huge.
Well, I think that's where it's a fun part to be in baseball right now, is you're starting to understand the benefits of integrating your trainer into your thought process for mechanical changes or pitch movement changes, right? Like, hey, I have this idea for what this guy should do mechanically. And the example I always give our guys is if you have really tight hips and we're trying to get you to stride further and you're a good work ethic guy, right? That's not really going to fit how your body wants to move. I'm going to beat my head into the wall because you're not going to be doing what I ask you to do. You're going to beat your head into the wall because it's really hard to make that adjustment and you want to, you just can't physically do it.
Mm.
And we're going to be butting heads when in reality, I'm the idiot for trying to get you to do it. Right. And those assessments and movement pattern communications from the trainer are so important for us and the strength guy too, right? Hey, this dude is a freaking ox, but every lift he moves really, really slow. And then on the mound, he moves really, really slow. And we just need a tick up. Hey, what can we do to get more out of him on this side of things? And then luckily here we have people who are willing to make adjustments and work with the individual and change plans based on communication. And we have a good little relationship, strength coach trainer and myself here. But it's fun to get more people involved because then they're seeking out their areas of strengths too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've actually, me being in the private sector, I wear both of those hats of pitching guy and then strength guy. And
Mhm.
I get to the point where I'm like, okay, there's this kid, he's very, very strong, but he's just kind of, like you said, hits that description to a T, just kind of moves a little slower on the mound. Like, all right, you're strong enough, but we got to make sure that that strength or the elasticity component is useful for what we're training for, right? Like we're not going to be power lifters. There's no point in sticking on that high side of, pure strength on the strength velocity curve. If you're weaker down here, probably more of our lifts should be geared towards moving things fast, you know, regardless of whatever the weight is. And I even got all my guys, it was like a little Christmas gift for me, with these new little magnets that you can
Mhm.
put not only on the bar, but you can put them on dumbbells. And it just kind of pops on there and you can track how fast things move. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that is something that's, from where I'm at, if I'm not present whenever they're training, they can objectively measure and be like, hey, this is where you need to be because this is where, your weak point might be in your training side. So I'll let you know how that turns out, but that's my little experimental piece right now. So
Well, it's fun, and luckily we have measurement tools similar to that here, and it's a big part of our progressive training is, what numbers are you trying to hit, not just total weight being pushed, but how fast are you moving it and getting into the dynamics of where each player should be in that is a pretty interesting because again, like you have the theory of a guy who moves really, really slow on the mound, but then he's an explosive electric athlete in the weight room. And it's like, you know what, man, maybe let's just try speeding up this tempo just a little bit and let your best muscles fire a little bit faster. And, you can find some low hanging fruit sometimes in that too.
oh, absolutely. It's always cool to kind of see some of those things start to mesh together and guys start to perform better. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Well, what else have you been kind of diving into, Matt? Is there anything that, maybe, we talked a little bit before we started the recording. Was there anything that you're just kind of more curious about or looking to get a little bit better depth of understanding on?
I think something that we started doing more this fall was just that biometric analysis
Hmm.
and just trying to put together a realistic process and procedure for honing in on that development side, right? You have the mass number of outputs of data information, anything from right as simple as the kinematic sequence to joint angles and rotational velocities and all of those things. And you can read a lot about them, and there's a lot of information about them as to theory best timings and velocities and all of those things, and just trying to really dive in this winter at looking at each player, look at where they're at currently, look at the theories of numbers, look at how the player is moving, and just try to connect the dots between those what the theory adjustment should be made, and then right putting together actual drills or movements or whatever to help that guy feel out that better movement, and then also make sure you're creating a scenario where you know if it's better or worse, right?
Yeah.
My freshman year of college, mechanics were so dumbed down and awesome that it was, hey, does this feel better or feel worse? Hey,
Mm.
does it feel like it's easier to throw the ball at the same velocity, or do you feel like you are working harder to throw the ball at the same velocity? So trying to make that full progression of, you know, the assessment and analysis to what's next to how does that player get there, but also just looking at it more, comboing the visual watching mechanics to the numbers of what, you know, that information is providing, I think is probably what I show up to the office and dive into the most. And I end up going pretty deep down rabbit holes and doing random, right, slopes of this and
Oh
try to
yeah.
figure out the difference here. And you start diving into 12 different things. And next thing you know, you have a whole new plan. But it's been fun. We try to not make too many big changes on guys without having a really, really good reason for it. So trying to make sure that that process and procedure is really good in December so that when guys come back in the spring, it's more fine-tuned and more less risk, you know, adjustments with it being time to compete, but also, you know, not giving up on training just because we have to get outs on game day.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's a lot to it with that you could probably unpack. Well, but I think the most essential piece is like, hey, like you got to know if you are going to try something out, when to maybe possibly eject if you feel like that plan's not going correctly. Like you said, is it getting better or worse? And I just kind of ask the guys. I mean, I'm sure you ask this probably just as often as I do. It's like, hey, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Like, don't just because we're making these changes and because the data tells us to, or because we think it's a good idea or this theory lines up. You know, does it feel more free, more loose, more effortless, or is it like, are you laboring to try to do this? Obviously, at first, like things are gonna feel awkward, right? It's never gonna be second nature when you're trying to do something different. But if they are making this change and they're like, oh wow, this feels a lot less stressful on my arm, great, cool, we're going somewhere, right? Or
Yeah.
if it's like the total opposite, and you're like, it's I feel pretty taxed whenever I do this, and we're like, I don't feel like I recover fast enough, after I pitch this way or something like that. Then it's like, all right, now we got another discussion to have with that too. So
Yeah.
as much as the theories go in, and I'm sure even in season, a lot of that will kind of go out the window and just like, hey, whatever gets dudes out at the end of the day, we're like, we got to work with what we got, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, I think it provides a fallback too, right?
Oh, sure.
If you get this information of when they're sequencing, how fast they're sequencing, what some things look like when they're at their best, and now all of a sudden they go two starts in a row and they start saying, "Man, Pass, I don't feel right. I don't feel good." Well, now we can put them on this, see if they're sequencing the same, see if some of their alignments are the same, see if some of their angles are the same, and then again work backwards to give a guy a realistic plan as to how to get back to their best self. I think is just as important as any development that could happen over the course of the year too. And I think those things can help guys, right? We try to, especially in the spring, let's focus on our strengths the most, right? If you throw 80% fastballs, let's make sure that our fastball is good every day, right? That guy is becoming more and more rare. So that's a bad example. But right, let's make sure our strengths maintain being our strengths. And if you have a 2% usage pitch, let's not throw a 25 pitch pen with 19 of those where we lose our strength for the sake of something else. Let's use some work days. Let's use some other days to work on that pitch and bring it into the pen, right? Again, don't give up on the pitch, but also let's make sure that if we're rolling out on Friday night, we keep our A stuff as often as possible.
100%. Well, and I think a lot of this too is you want to find actionable plans that, you could have all the data in the world. You can have the lab like Wake Forest out there, but if you don't know what you're going to do with this and actually make that adjustment, like you just said, like be like, hey, you're only using this pitch X amount of times, or this pitch isn't the best pitch for you to use, maybe for the opponents that you got for this upcoming week, then it's like, hey, don't waste your practice time or your training time, right? You want to have a like an ROI and an investment. You have to have a return on your training time too.
Yeah.
Making sure that you're optimizing that as best as possible.
Yeah. And hopefully as a starter, you can break down your week and figure out what pitches you're going to really need to use that weekend and keep your strengths. But also if it's like, hey man, this, right, we're still in college. Hey, this team teaches this one swing. You're going to need to use this pitch a little bit more often because this team's plan, this team's swing, this team's one thing, it is all generated around right here, and you throw it right there a lot. And as much as I think you're an above average player, right, I make jokes with the guys. Oh, when we do scouting reports, are we going to pitch to my strengths or their weaknesses? I tell them, hey man, if that's the only option, you're a really bad pitcher. Like we should be able to do more than one thing to get somebody out. And if your disparity is only those two things, I either should have recruited somebody else or we need to find different ways to get guys outs. And I think that's where those midweek pens can help guys understand, oh man, this whole team dumps the barrel and just tries to do this with it. And, say we're facing an all left-handed lineup and I'm a sinker only thrower and I try to target that outside low quadrant, and that's where their entire swing path is. Well, what's the plan? How are we going to win this weekend, or are we just going to try to get you out of there as fast as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then you got maybe a handful of those guys in the lineup. They're taught to swing that way, but then they're able to make those adjustments. So now you got to adjust on the fly, right? Like you have, I think I heard this quote a while back, and I might butcher this, but good pitchers make adjustments between innings. Great pitchers make adjustment between pitches.
Yeah, and there's that quote for hitters too, right?
Mm-hmm.
The worse of a hitter you are, the longer it takes to make an adjustment. And
Absolutely.
being able to, and again, that's just like the whole process of why do work days and mound days matter so much, so that you can learn when you're missing somewhere, why you're missing there, and how to make that adjustment. Right? If you don't have target for catch play, if you don't have target for your other things, and you keep missing, and you never force yourself to correct, how should I expect you're going to be able to do it on the mound on game day?
Yeah, that's it. You can't improve something that you don't measure.
Yeah, it's not like high school where the catcher gets 50,000 mound visits and you have a 4-hour, 7-inning game because the catcher walks
Oh,
up to
yeah.
you every up 2-0, got to go see if my guy's okay.
Got to use those sparingly for sure. That's more of just like I don't know, like some of the other sports where they just have timeouts to kind of break up the rhythm of guys. I get that, but you don't have that luxury in college baseball anymore.
Well, and I think it's great how proactive we have to be towards coaching, right? Like it's not reactive coaching quite as much on game day, right? You have to react if a team has a good plan for how you're pitching, but your guys better be able to feel what's right and what's wrong on the mound, and they better be able to make an adjustment inside of that. Otherwise, you only get, as a coach, I only get 3 mound visits. I can't go out there and fix something every time. You need to be able to, and that's where the proactive nature towards pitching and pitchers comes into play, is they need to be able to fix it sometimes. They need to be able to know what to do sometimes. And, you need to help them get there and feel confident in it come game day, right? You can't just make an adjustment on the fly if
Or
you
yeah,
haven't done
no,
it
you
before.
can't. Yeah, absolutely. Or sometimes, as crazy as it sounds, sometimes that decision is don't make a change. Maybe
Yeah.
you chalk it up as a bad day and move on.
I had a mound visit probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I went out talking to the guy, and he was our Sunday starter. He did not start off very good. And hey man, what do you got? He had no clue, right? It was like, okay, hey, for right now, I know this is your normal target. Let's aim over here. Let's just aim a little bit further this way, and we'll get through it and we'll figure it out mechanically later. But for right now, let's just aim here and
Mhm.
figure it out as we go. And it opens your eyes towards coaching. But the kid came off the mound and was like, pass. I never thought about just aiming different. Man, that was so easy. What a good idea that was. And as a coach, you're like, wow, I'm
How
horrible
is that
at
not
this.
an
If
option? Yeah.
he has never even thought to just aim different on the mound, and right, it's not always, I'm not perfectly hinging and my scapula is slightly late, so I need to trigger this. Nope, let's just aim different, get this batter out, and let's figure out the mechanics on Tuesday in our pen or on Wednesday in our pen. But for right now, let's just find a way to win, you know, win the at bat, get back in the zone.
Yeah. Wow. That's something that probably us as for me, I always just kind of intuitively knew that. I was like, okay, today my curveball's not on, so I have to like really almost kind of throw it behind this guy to get it to break where I would normally do it versus just kind of letting it rip. But yeah, that definitely needs to be an option to think about. That's really cool that you kind of had that epiphany. But yeah,
Well,
as coaches, how do we make sure that we're training that or allowing that space for them to do that in their practices to not be so intrinsically focused, right?
mhm.
Like you mentioned the scapula or the hinge or all that. Like there's time and place for it, don't get me wrong, but when it comes to actually playing on the field, you don't have time to waste to think about mechanics, so you got to also know how to adapt and adjust with what you got.
Yeah, we try to compare it to, right, every locker room in the country seems to have a ping pong table, and our offices are above the ping pong table, and you hear those guys screaming and yelling and fighting to no regard to win a ping pong match. And it's like, hey man, just give me that guy on the mound. We can work on scaploid and hinge and all those things the other 6 days a week. And just give me the ping pong competitor where you just find a way and figure it out. Target a weakness, whatever, attack at no end, compete your ass off, and like, let's just go win today. And I'm not saying there aren't mechanical adjustments on the mounting game. I don't
Yeah,
want to neglect that, but like, give me a winner on the mound on Friday and give me a trainer the other 6 days a week.
that's it. That helps you stay in the zone right there, stay locked in mentally, and help you get guys out by throwing it in the zone.
Yeah.
I love it. Awesome. Well, Matt, appreciate you coming on, man. And where can the listeners get a hold of you if they want to reach out or talk? Obviously, within if it's a coach, they can reach out anytime. But players within the guidelines of NCAA, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So
If you're anybody with any recruit, I'll just give you my phone number and post it, because the more good players we have, the better coach I get to really look like, and
there you go.
that always goes a long way. But it, Twitter, email, honestly, email's the worst way to contact me.
I'm
My
sure
phone
that gets
number is
blown
is
up
way better.
for sure. I love it. I love it. Well, thanks again. And for those of y'all listening, stay in the zone.